Welcome to the program Woke Up, where we amplify the voices of those whom today's critical social justice movement and woke ideology have seduced. They realized they were being led to a place they did not want to be and woke up to tell their story. Now the host, Michael Ballantyne.
Good afternoon, everybody. We have an exciting program here today. We've got an amazing guest who has an amazing story. I've been following her for quite some time. She's a very deep thinker, very profound. And as you know, the name of the program is We Left Today's Social Justice Movement and Wokeism. No one's saying we're leaving the social justice movement or don't believe in equality and justice. We all do. But today, in the way it is manifested with cancel culture and separating people into categories and the animosity, we believe needs some rethinking and nuance. And so I've got on the show today for everybody is a wonderful woman who has an incredible story to tell, and her name is Cattinson. And Cat, I just want to introduce you to everybody, and I want to ask you, like, this mindset that you got into and where that led you. And maybe you just feel free to open up your heart and share your pathway the last 10 or 15 years of your life a little bit.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks for that great introduction, Michael. So I think when it comes to social justice, and in my experience, particularly the gender identity movement, I think agendas can be pushed forward under the guise of human rights and equality when really they're sort of infringing upon other people's rights and harming a lot of people and sort of doing the opposite of what they proclaim to be doing. So I'm a detransition woman, to be specific. I started questioning my gender when I was very young. I think I was around 5 years old the first time I remember asking my mom if it was possible to change gender. And, I had a lot of things going on in my life at that time that made me feel uncomfortable in my body, made me feel like unsafe being a girl, struggled with bullying. I suffered some abuse at a very young age. So I think it had to do with that, and also just sort of the gender roles that were being portrayed to me of what I was supposed to be like as a girl or as a woman, and they made me feel very uncomfortable. So yeah, but back then, so I'm a bit older than some of the kids transitioning now. I'm 31. So back then, it wasn't like being taught in schools that you could be transgender. It wasn't ubiquitous like it is today. So I didn't even find out about trans people or anything until I was around 13 years old from an online forum, actually. And so I don't know if you want me to go into my full story right now, but I ended up not transitioning as a child or as an adolescent because I was not affirmed by my doctors or by my parents or peers, which is something that was painful, but I'm now very grateful for, and I'm sure I'll get to why that is. But I ended up transitioning as an adult and later coming to detransition, and so now I'm living as my biological sex. I consider myself a detransition woman, and if anything, I feel like my mental health is better than it has ever been after detransitioning.
And you started to have these questions when you were 5, and then at what age did you start to proactively take the steps to transition? How old were you at that point?
So when I was 13 and I found this website online, and it actually still exists. I'm writing an op-ed right now about this, and so I was researching yesterday, and it's called ftmguide.com. And so I discovered this website at 13 years old, and it has everything from finding how to pass as a man, if you're born female, and the surgeries you can get, just, various things, a lot of which is not appropriate for a child. But anyway, after discovering this website, I pretty much already had the sense that my parents would not approve of me medically transitioning. For some reason, I just sort of took it at face value that, it was something I would do as an adult. But I did begin binding my chest. I began using an ace bandage at first, which is like very unhealthy for you. And I continued binding on and off for the next 15 years. So in the beginning, it was more of like I used non-medical means in the beginning, and I attempted to transition socially. I came out to some of my peers. I came out to my parents who didn't really affirm me. And, I'm a 5'2", very small boned, very feminine looking woman naturally. So it was just not possible at all for me to pass as a boy. If anything, sometimes people would read me as like a 12-year-old boy, which is not what I wanted. I wanted to be seen as my age. So yeah, for the next like 15 years, I kind of just went through these periods. It was like a pendulum swing where either I'd be, actively trying to transition, but wasn't really able to without the medical means. Or I was like trying to be a girl, trying to be a woman, and, sort of, because back then it was hard to be gender nonconforming. It was, it was not like celebrated more like it is today. So, yeah, I just kind of flip-flopped for a long time. And it wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that I finally decided, okay, I've tried everything else. And I thought it was impossible for me to be happy as a woman. And so I decided to finally try the testosterone.
When you were going through, it sounds like you were having these thoughts when you were going through puberty, as your body was transitioning and you were growing breasts and getting hips and what happens. Were you not liking the fact that you were starting to grow breasts, and did you hate those, or like what was going on a subconscious level as your body was taking on and going through puberty?
I think for many girls, not just girls, boys too. Puberty is a time where your body is changing very rapidly, as you said. And for me, basically within a year, so going from like 7th to 8th grade, my body just completely changed. The shape of my body changed, and the reaction I was getting from other kids, particularly other boys, but other girls too, just made me really uncomfortable. I had always kind of been an outcast. I'd been like bullied a lot. I was sort of the weird kid in school, and it sort of went from being just like no one wanted to talk to me to like suddenly getting all this attention from boys, but it wasn't the kind of attention that I wanted. Like it didn't feel like respectful. It felt like they only wanted to talk to me because of my body changing. And it wasn't only boys my age, but it was like older men as well. And it was just, yeah, it did make me very uncomfortable. And especially since I didn't really I didn't feel like I related to other girls. I didn't feel like I related to like feminine stereotypes. So I just, once you go through puberty, whatever biological sex you are just becomes like so much more obvious. So it was just uncomfortable for me in a lot of ways. And in addition to questioning my gender, I also started to develop an eating disorder because I was so uncomfortable with the feminine shape of my body. And so I started restricting my food intake in order to get more of like a slim androgynous figure again.
And during this period in your life, what types of messaging were you getting in terms of affirmation or encouragement? Were you active in social media? Were you in some types of clubs, or like what was the social support you were getting? How would you describe that?
When I was a teenager, it was again very different than it is today, but I basically gravitated towards these websites that I was visiting, the FTM Guide and some other ones that had forums where I could read, mostly trans adults talking to each other. And, sometimes I would contribute comments of my own, but more often I was honestly just reading and like informing myself. And I was getting into this mindset and just sort of, this ideology that, female or woman is like a gender role. Same thing with man. Like it's not a biological reality. It's just a gender role. And if you feel that male gender stereotypes fit you better, then maybe you're like actually a man in a female body, and just all this stuff that now after breaking out of it, it sounds really crazy to me and nonsensical. But as a teenager, learning about gender dysphoria, which was called gender identity disorder back then, I really felt like that just was the answer to all of my problems. And that's very appealing as a young child. So in the beginning, it was very much just online for me. It wasn't like today where it's being taught in schools. My peers were not, if anything, the bullying got worse when I started to dress more gender nonconforming. So it was really hard. I didn't really have any outside help with it. I got some help for my eating disorder because that ended up getting really serious. But finally, when I was 17, it became clear that my dysphoria wasn't just going to go away. And so I asked my parents to take me to a gender therapist. And that was the first time that I really experienced like affirmation. But then, throughout the next like 10 or so years after that, I watched the climate rapidly change around that, to the point where when I was at university, it was being taught as part of the curriculum. And, in classes, you would go around and say your pronouns to everyone. And so I think that was a large part of, why I ended up actually deciding to medically transition later, is because of this changing climate around gender ideology.
And how did your mom and dad respond? And it seems like they were supportive to a certain level. At least they brought you to the clinic. And what was their reaction to the the things that were going on a psychological and emotional level with their daughter?
In the beginning, I told my mom first. I don't remember how old I think I was probably around 14 or 15 when I first told my mom. And she was sort of like, she had never even heard of it before. Like, she had heard of men transitioning to try to be women, because that was something that was more covered in media, but like nobody knew about females identifying as transgender. It just like wasn't a thing. So she was kind of surprised by it, but she did recall sometimes as a kid when I was gender nonconforming, like I used to like to put on like my dad's work hat and sunglasses. And so she was like, okay, well, that kind of makes sense, knowing like how you could be as a kid. But then after talking to my dad, and then the two of them, I think, researched like the surgeries and just started looking more into it, and they got really scared. And so then they sort of talked to me and said, Kat, you're a girl, you know, basically just relayed to me that they were not comfortable with me identifying as the opposite sex. Yeah, so after researching the whole transgender thing and how it looked, especially for, you know, female to male people, I think they just got really scared for me and my health, and they were scared I wouldn't pass as a man, which I have mixed feelings about, like that being one of the main reasons. But yeah, so I was a 5'2" female with small bones, as I mentioned, and they were just like, well, you're never going to pass as a man. It's going to be like a hard life for you. And of course, medical stuff. So they discouraged me. And that caused a huge rift in our relationship for the next, I don't know, 10, 15 years. But I'm thankful that they didn't affirm me, because I look at what's happening to kids now who are coming out at the age that I came out. You know, they're getting put on puberty blockers, which are not reversible and very dangerous. So, you know, it was just a hard time. Like, I think back on it and just how difficult it was, but you know, I'm able to be the person I am now, and I'm glad I have my health and my fertility still.
So some time went by and you felt more and more that you wanted to go through the process of transitioning to live a life as not only to present, but to live a life as a male, I'm understanding. And tell us about that process and what steps you began to take, and how you're feeling along that path.
So the medical part, it did take me a long time to start. It was a lot of deliberation, and part of that was also my singing voice, because I had been singing with my family since I was around 7 years old, doing professional gigs. I was starting to write my own music by age 13. I had produced my first album, and so my voice was very important to me, my singing voice. So that was another factor in it, because I knew the testosterone would change my voice. But the first time testosterone was ever brought into the conversation, for those who don't know, testosterone is usually the first step for most females wanting to transition to male. It's not always the first step, but I'd say most frequently that's what it is. And so when I was 17 and my parents took me to this gender therapist, he actually suggested I start testosterone by the third appointment. And, you know, at 17, part of it was my parents didn't affirm me. I didn't feel I had enough support, but also just something felt fishy about it to me. Like, I felt like this man was not really listening to me. Like, I had so many comorbidities, and I just didn't feel like he was taking those into account. Because although I wanted to transition, like, I did want to make sure there wasn't like another solution, or, you know, I guess I wanted to just really talk to someone who knew what they were talking about and like put on the brakes a little bit. And he was just like, affirmation. So when I was, I think 23, yeah, I think I was 23, I went to a gender clinic, and I think at that time they did do some blood work and they prescribed me testosterone, but I had to like inject it myself, and I did like one dose, but it was the intramuscular, and they had prescribed me like this mega dose. So it was like this long needle, like probably this long, and you're injecting. I mean, it was just horrifying for like someone who, you know, I didn't have any experience with like medical stuff, and just so I did do one dose, and I was just terrified I was gonna like hit a vein. My heart was like pounding, and so after that kind of like deterred me from doing any more. So yeah, that was 23, and then again when I was 28. So at that point I went through Planned Parenthood, because I at that point knew that they were providing gender services. So I called them and I talked to the receptionist, and I said, yeah, you know, I'm looking for like gender affirming care. I'm ready to start start the process. And like, I thought the process would be like maybe some psychological appointments, maybe some blood work, at least like, you know, a physical, like medical evaluation. And she was like, okay, well, I'll have the doctor call you back. And the doctor called me back maybe a day later, and we talked for about 30 minutes. She just asked me some really basic questions. I'm using the pronoun she quite liberally here because I think this was someone who was trans identified as well. So yeah, it was just a very relatively short conversation. She brought up a few risks of testosterone, but really the way it was played off is like, oh, you know, you shouldn't smoke, like that's bad for you, like don't smoke if you're taking testosterone, you know, don't drink too much alcohol, but like that's what doctors tell you all the time. So I now know that there's a hugely elevated risk of heart attack from taking testosterone as a female, which, you know, it was not presented to me that way. Stroke as well. But anyway, I was prescribed over the phone. She ordered some labs, but she did not require me to get them before picking up the testosterone. And, you know, so I ended up picking up my prescription that day and starting shortly after. And yeah, it was just, I mean, honestly, all throughout, it was just unbelievably easy. There was really not a lot of pushback. I never really felt like I got quality mental health care, you know, and even like my insurance covered the testosterone, but it did not cover therapy. So yeah, I did feel like testosterone was my only option, but also I just feel like no other options were really presented to me. So of course I was going to believe that was my best choice.
And so then after you began that, how did you feel initially? And what was the process where you came to change your mind or have regret? Or was there further steps you took as well, concurrent with that to transition? Or like what happened the next several months or years?
It was an interesting few months. So the first like month or two, I actually felt amazing. I feel like the testosterone was kind of working as a mood stabilizer and also gave me more energy. So physically, I did feel pretty good the first couple months. I was happy.
That's common, right?
Yeah,
Introduction of testosterone artificially into the body can have an initial mood enhancing effect, from what I understand.
definitely. I've heard that from a lot of other women who have transitioned and detransitioned that initially, you know, it varies from person to person. Some people felt good for a few months to even like a year. For me, it didn't really last long. But yeah, there is a honeymoon period where some of the positive effects are manifesting, but you know, some of the health side effects have not set on yet. So that's what happened with me. I was also excited about, you know, getting stronger. Like I used to be a exercise instructor at a gym, and I've always been into fitness. So I was like lifting weights and I was getting stronger so much faster. And that was really exciting to me. My voice was sort of slowly deepening in the beginning, like it was like just gradually gaining more and more low notes. And that was exciting to me because I did want my voice to deepen. I was excited about having like a male singing voice and what that would sound like. So at first it was like very exciting, and I had some trans friends who were really encouraging. Like I had one best friend in particular who, you know, had told me how much happier he was after his transition. And I really kind of modeled after him in a way because he and I had struggled with some of the same issues like prior to transitioning, and so he was like a beacon of hope to me. But yeah, within a few months everything started to change. I think the first thing I started noticing was like when I wake up in the mornings, I just didn't feel well. Like I had nausea that would kind of stick around throughout the day. If I ate certain foods or like drank alcohol, it would get worse. Sometimes I'd even be like throwing up. I started to get this pain in my right side. It could have been related to my liver or gallbladder. I'm honestly still not entirely sure at this point. But it was that. And then I started to get heart palpitations, especially when I was wearing my binder. So yeah, it was the health side effects. It was the nausea and the heart stuff. And it was really scary with the heart stuff because I'd be in public, I'd be wearing my binder. And so even when I was on testosterone, I did not pass as a man. Like a lot of times people would be like unsure of my gender. They'd be kind of like staring at me and looking at me like, is that a boy or a girl? But it was never like 100% pass as a man. So I was nervous to go in either bathroom, but I just felt like I needed to like get my binder off. But then I was like scared to go in the bathroom, and so I'd just be sort of like standing there feeling like I was dying. It was summer as well, so it was like the heat was like beating down on me, and anyway, it was just really bad. But even given the health side effects I was experiencing, I was not ready to stop because I was just like, you know what, this is I've tried being happy as a woman for so long, and it's it's just, it doesn't work. And then this narrative of suicide as well, because there's this whole thing of, the dominant narrative now is that if you have gender dysphoria and you don't transition, then you're at an extremely high risk of suicide. Like, it's basically between transitioning and offing yourself. And
if you're a parent, the binary choice is, would you rather have a trans kid or a dead kid? And
exactly,
it's so profoundly challenging and somewhat manipulative. And what's a parent going to say? The end of discussion, no dialogue. I just wanted to make that binary choice that parents that are grieving and thinking, oh, what's wrong with my child? How can I love them? How can I help them? Is this the right thing? All the questions, possibly grieving the loss of a son or a daughter in terms of the gender identity. But then it's like, that's the only decision, the only choice that you're given. You better do this and conform or your kid might be dead. And it's just like, that's just so stark, and no other options really.
It's so manipulative, and it's just so insane that it's doctors telling parents this, because when I was a teenager and I struggled with anorexia, I had like a really serious case of anorexia. I had to be hospitalized, put in inpatient treatment multiple times. And there was times that I threatened I was going to kill myself. Like I said, if you don't let me starve myself, essentially, I'm going to kill myself. And the way that my parents and doctors responded to me at that time was to put me in a psych ward. Like, I was literally in a psych ward on 2 separate occasions because of that. And so it's just, I'm just laughing because, like, the ridiculousness of suddenly, because it's gender dysphoria, we should just give the kid whatever they want or they're going to kill themselves. Like, it's not how we've ever responded to suicide for like any other condition. And it's just so unprofessional, and it is manipulative. And the science that this is based on is really, it's very shoddy. It's not the same quality of medical science that we would normally, it's not equivalent to any other field of medicine in terms of the quality of science. So it's just, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like, kids are hearing like, oh, if I don't transition, I could kill myself. And that is going to make them more likely to feel that way, So yeah, that was what I was feeling when I was having all these health side effects. But I thought the alternative was worse, and I didn't know of any other options. So I pushed on for a couple more months. But, kind of the last straw for me is, so I'd done my dose of testosterone, and basically I would inject it once a week. And so I did my injection, and I think the night before I was practicing some vocal stuff. I was singing, and like 2 days later, I tried to sing the exact same song, and I opened my mouth to sing it, and just air and squeaks came out when I tried, and just the whole quality of my voice was destroyed. Like, it was raspy, it was hoarse, it was cracking. And like, yeah, I was aware that my voice would change, but not to the extent that it had. And it was, it not only sounded unattractive, but it was painful as well. Like, it was becoming more and more painful to speak and sing. And singing is my major form of artistic and creative expression. And when that happened, it was way harder than I thought it would be. It was just devastating to not be able to sing. And it just hit me like, wow, this is permanent. Like, I'm never going to get the same voice back that I had. And I just started thinking like, oh my God, what have I done? And so that really was the catalyst for me deciding to detransition, was losing my voice. And
you were losing more than just your gender identity. You were losing a part of yourself, a gifting, something that's a gift given to you to express your soul, and not being able to use that on top of these other things, because there are consequences to the decisions we make. That must have been a horrible process for you to be in.
It was. And a lot of people, tell me, they're like, well, didn't you know your voice would change? Like, wow, you're so stupid to like take testosterone. Like, I mean, it's just the narrative really shifts, right? Like, when you're trans and you're like, I want to take testosterone, you have like all these people cheering you on. And then when you say, hey, this isn't working for me, like, I'm actually really devastated to have lost my singing voice, they just basically turn around and blame it on you, and say like, oh, you should have known better. But my doctor told me my voice would deepen, but they didn't tell me it would be painful every day to speak and sing. And I also learned that, there are some particular effects on the female singing voice from taking testosterone. It's not the same thing as a male would experience, because, I was an adult female I was not a adolescent boy going through puberty, and the anatomical changes that happen are different. It's different in a female body. And so anyway, yeah, I realized that, my gender, and it's not even that it's not even a choice of like, oh, being a man would be better than being able to sing. Like, it's because I never would have been a man. Like, it's impossible for humans to change sex, and I never wanted to be a trans man. Like, I never wanted to be a 5'2" man with a vagina. Like, I wanted to be a biological man, and that would have never been possible for me. So it was like I was trading my singing voice for this impossible dream. And once I realized that, I was like, yeah, I can't do this to myself anymore. For the next 6 months, I still didn't acknowledge that I was female. Like I didn't go back to living as a woman right away, because I still had gender dysphoria. I was still really uncomfortable with that. So I called myself non-binary for about 6 months, and I still sort of, I still believed in the ideology. I wasn't completely deprogrammed yet. So it took me a few months to sort of deprogram from that, but I was just kind of like, okay, I can't keep taking testosterone. I had top surgery, a double mastectomy scheduled as well. I've been talking to a surgeon about that, and I canceled with him. I canceled my legal name change. I already had paperwork turned in for that. So I pretty much, like, after the first physical changes were just so devastating, I was like, maybe it's just a bad idea to make any other rash decisions right now.
Yeah, like the concept gender affirming care. So gender affirming care in today's language is you affirm whatever is in the patient's mind, whatever is in their head, you affirm that, escaping the scientific reality that you have two X chromosomes. And why can't we have gender affirming care to work with people like yourself that are struggling with gender dysphoria, to affirm your femininity, to affirm your singing voice? I understand you have this problem, and we're here for you. We're going to affirm who you are for you to overcome these issues and be all you can be and maintain your assigned gender at birth. Maybe I'm looking at it wrong, so please correct me if I'm not seeing that correctly.
No, I think the term gender affirming care is is absolutely misleading. You're right about that. I mean, even if you're someone who believes, there are some people who are truly trans. I myself, well, I'll touch on that in a little bit. But even if you are someone who believes that there are some people who are truly trans and should transition as adults or whatever, it's like when there's one path that leads to lifelong medicalization, being reliant on big pharma for the rest of your life and being permanently sterilized, having all these health issues, both known and unknown. When one path leads to that and the other path leads to fewer doctor's appointments and no medicalization, I think it's pretty obvious like which path would be the first choice. But this gender ideology tries to tell kids like, oh, it doesn't matter whether you identify as your birth sex or the opposite sex. Like, they're both equally fine. And so if you just say you're the opposite sex, we should affirm you in that. And the problem with affirmation and like social transition is, most often that will lead to the medicalization eventually. Because I mean, social transition, if you're not like, I attempted to socially transition, and it only made me feel more uncomfortable in my body, because it just made it more and more clear that I was not a boy, I was not a man, and I almost felt more compelled to start the medicalization. So yeah, I absolutely think gender, I mean, I just don't even like the phrase gender affirming care, because I think it's like, I don't know if you've read 1984, but it's like new speak. It just doesn't mean what it's supposed to mean, and it's a nonsensical phrase. I think that what we need to be teaching kids is, no matter what kind of body you have, you're free to be yourself in that body.
2 + 2 is 5.
Exactly. Trans women are women.
Yeah. Okay. So you had support. Your friends were saying you were so brave, and then you decided to detransition. And what happened to all those people that encouraged you in that path? And you said, I don't feel comfortable. How has this woke community responded to you as you've decided this is just not the best decision for my life?
There were sort of two camps of the woke people, and so this was during the pandemic, during the lockdown specifically. So my social life and real life had diminished somewhat. Like I wasn't going out as much, but I did have several trans friends in real life. But more, I was very involved with the community online, especially on TikTok. I had made an account for my music, but I'd been connecting with other trans people on there and just really become a part of that community. So there were kind of two camps of people and how they responded to my detransition. The first was, well, sorry, I'll say three actually, but the first was just outright rejection and hate, like from the get-go, just like shut up, don't talk about your experience, you don't deserve a voice, you're just a cis person, nothing you have to say is of value, so just shut up, you're harming the trans community. So that was one group. The second group was more support with a caveat, right? So they were like, oh yeah, you're valid, that's perfectly fine that you've detransitioned, however, you better not say these things, you better not become a TERF. Like I think the first thing I said that people or one of the first things I said that people
the acronym, can you describe what the acronym TERF is? Because
yes, so it stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist, which is essentially a feminist who doesn't count trans women as part of her feminism. So I mean, yes, I am a TERF. I think that feminism is a movement for biological females, and being female is a unique biological state. It is, I don't think it's possible for a biological male to know what it's like to be a woman. And that doesn't mean that I don't think both men and women have unique struggles, but it's just I think we deserve a movement for biological females, and that's what feminism has always fought for. So but anyway, these weren't always this wasn't always the way I viewed it. So when I was getting called a TERF just for talking about like detransitioning, it was just like, okay, this is weird. But yeah, one of the things I said initially that a lot of people pushed back on was that I had suffered physical damage because of transitioning. I think I said testosterone damaged my voice or something like that, which is objectively true. Like it's been extremely hard to recover from the vocal damage as a singer and just as just a regular person trying to socialize with other people. Like I was in so much pain because of what testosterone did to my voice. But people really push back on that narrative, and they're like, oh, cross-sex hormones or testosterone doesn't damage your body, that's TERF language, that's transphobic. And so they're basically like, we'll support you if you fit into this specific narrative, but otherwise, like, no, you're not allowed to tell your experience, you're not allowed to speak. And then finally there are a few people who are trans identified who do still support me, and they think I have the right to the opinions that I have. And the thing is that I actually harbor no negative feelings towards anyone who identifies as trans. In fact, I relate to them in a lot of ways, and I really I want the best for them. I want the best medical care for them. I want the best psychological care. I don't want them to make decisions based on false information like I did. So, that's really where I'm coming from. It's coming from love. It's not coming from hatred or bias or anything like that. And it just, for some people to see me like that, initially it really hurt. Now I don't really care because I just know they're wrong, but yeah.
I've seen a lot of your material, and I want to commend you because you really touched my heart, because you are filled with empathy. You are filled with grace. You're judging nobody, and just your messaging towards the trans community and the families that are going through this. I just love the way you're not looking to hurt anybody. You're just trying to bring facts, and you're presenting them in love. You're telling your story. And I recommend to anybody in our audience to please follow Kat and listen to the way she delivers messages. And like one as we're closing up here, I had a couple more questions for you. The first one is, what advice would you give to parents that have a child that is struggling with gender dysphoria or looking to possibly change their gender presentation, that are feeling uncomfortable? What can they do? What should they do? What shouldn't they do? What would your advice be for them?
So, disclaimer, I'm not a parent. I feel like a a big sister towards a lot of these trans kids. I have a lot of empathy for them. But yeah, as parents, I would say the number one most important thing is compassion and just listening to your kid, and just maybe asking more exploratory questions, like, what is it about being a girl? Or, what do you think being a girl is? How do you see being a girl? What about that is, making you uncomfortable? Because, that's one thing that I wish, I love my parents. I'm so grateful for my parents, but, I didn't really feel like they listened to me around this issue. And so, that's one thing I would say. But also, it's hold firm to your beliefs. This whole narrative of the suicide and all of that, this isn't based in reality. It's not based in science. And so you can extend a compassionate ear without actually having to agree with this ideology. I'd also recommend the book Irreversible Damage by Abigail Schreier was really good. Material Girls by Kathleen Stock was really good as well. So I'd say educate yourself about the issue for sure. Mm-hmm. Try to monitor your kids' social media as well as much as you can, because even more so than when I was a kid, there are a lot of things out there that are just very toxic that I would not want my kid seeing, because it's very dangerous for a developing mind.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you for those references. And, in the last portion here, I'm really impressed with the work you're doing now, how you're being used to bring awareness and help. And maybe you can tell our audience some of the things that you've been involved with in the last year or two, and what you're doing now to help the world.
Sure. I'm sorry. COVID brain fog. I've been really fortunate in the last year and a half since I've started speaking out about my detransition, just for meeting all the people that I've met. And I've been accepted more and just felt more at home in the detrans community, and not only detransitioners, but also parents and just, good Samaritans that see what's happening and they want to step up to protect kids. And so I've found myself getting involved with activism because, particularly with transitions happening under 18, I feel it is my responsibility, given what I've been through, to protect young people from, the harmful psychology and then the harmful medical effects of prepubescent or pubescent transition. So I have spoken out at several legislative hearings. I've spoken to the California Senate, my home state. I also spoke before the Florida Medical Board recently. They just passed a measure actually to ban puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries for those under 18. And I testified with 8 other detransitioners, which was, I think it was really powerful. It was really difficult because of the pushback from activists and protesters in favor of transitioning children. And I'm also part of an organization called Detrans United. We're sort of just starting up, but our goal is to provide resources for people who are newly detransitioned and just provide accurate information about transition and detransition. And I'm doing some other things too. I'm writing a book, but yeah, I'm happy to be able to do my part given my experience, because as painful as it was, I feel like it is worthwhile to be able to help other people who feel similar.
But if you look at some of the papers, it just seems like everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but overwhelmingly people are happy once they transition. But you're saying, these papers are painting a narrative, and the reality in maybe it's just anecdotally, maybe you have evidence, but it seems like there's more and more, and it's accelerating, those who felt like they were pushed into transitioning and now have detransitioned, and they feel like it wasn't the best move for them. And so would you agree with that? Because it does seem like people want to paint the picture that it's the greatest thing once you transition.
The problem with a lot of studies looking at the long-term impacts of medically transitioning is that, well, one of the things that's wrong with them is they have a very, very high dropout rate. So essentially what that means is, let's say there's a study of 200 people who either started hormones, had surgeries, etc. And then they follow up with them after a particular interval. And what happens is that 20, 30, 40, a lot of times over 50% of the participants are dropping out of these studies. So, if 50% of your study drop out, but then, the 50% that are left all say, sure, I'm happy, you're ignoring what happened to half of the people you're studying. So, there's a lot of fake statistics that get thrown around, like only 1% of people detransition, and things like that. But it's just the quality of the science is not sufficient to make claims like that. So it's not real science. It is propaganda. Another thing that is wrong with a lot of these studies is that the follow-up period is very, very short. So, it's like a year, 18 months, maybe 3 to 5 years at the most for the follow-up. And a lot of the health issues for people who have transitioned don't manifest until, 5, 10, 15 years after transitioning, but they can be really, really serious. And so studies have shown that the worst outcomes of transition, or rather like the suicide risk, for instance, is the highest 10 or more years after the surgery. So I think a lot of people have a honeymoon period with transitioning. I think that they are told it's going to help them and they go forward with it. And for a while they get what they want and they feel better. I mean, even me, I did feel better for a period. If you would have asked me a few months after starting to transition, I would have said that I'm happy, So there's just a lot of these problems with the methodologies of these studies. And I can't even say that it's an accident because it seems very calculated to me, just given how many of them there are and how many flaws there are with these studies. So there's new research coming out this year that is starting to paint a more accurate picture. And I think the further we go, the more the science is going to catch up. So, and anecdotally, people may report, I am happy after transitioning. And, I don't want to discount that. But that said, people, especially people who suffer from mental illness, are notoriously poor. They're notoriously unreliable narrators of their own story and their own mental health. I mean, for instance, like, when I had an eating disorder, for instance, I thought my eating disorder was making me happier. I thought losing weight was making me happier, but it's just, we don't really have the data to support this.
And my last question would be, what about a real earnest friend, a real earnest person that wants justice and wants the best for somebody, and they're trying to support their friend by saying, you go for it, you go ahead and transition, I'm going to be here for you. What kind of advice would you give to a friend who really means well, but might actually be doing harm and creating some pressure? How can they support their friend short of just saying, you go for it?
Michael, it's so hard, especially in the current, political climate of affirmation only, because it is somewhat like a cult. If you don't go along with the ideology, you are written off as hateful rather than caring. Personally, like my friends who are still transitioning, I wish them the best, and I really do wish them happiness at the end of the day. But I think affirming and, agreeing to use opposite sex pronouns for somebody, I think it does ultimately encourage them to make irreversible changes, to harm their health, etc. So, I would not recommend affirmation, but I would recommend just still letting that person know that you care about them as much as possible. I mean, if it's someone that you absolutely, you must keep in your life, like it's a little bit different. But sorry, I'm kind of drawing a blank here, but
That's great.
I think it's situational as well, because obviously, like I being someone who has personally been through transition and detransition, like it's a little different than someone who's, not involved with the community, because I do know how easy it is for someone to just kind of write you off as hateful and transphobic when really you do have this person's best interest at heart.
Oh, that's beautiful. And so I'm going to give you the last word. Just share anything on your heart, and please do tell our listeners and watchers how people can reach out to you, whether they're considering this, how they can stand with their friends or detransitioning. Let us know how we can continue to follow you, and I'll give you the last word to encourage our listeners.
Thanks, Michael. So I'm on all social media. I'm Cattinson on YouTube. I'm Cattinson on Twitter. On Instagram, I'm Cat Robot Official, which is my music name. And I also have a music YouTube channel, which is Cat Robot Official as well. As far as something I'd like to end with is, so something that I just really wish had been made more clear to me as a kid is that there isn't one way to be a woman. There isn't only one way to be a man. Whatever body you have is your vehicle for life, and it's a gift. It really is. It is your vessel for experiencing the world, and it's just so important to care for it and appreciate it. But like me as a woman, I can be however I want. I can be feminine, I can be masculine, I can, have a career, I can choose to have a family. Like, it's, even no matter what the messages are that you get from culture, you can be anyone you want to be, and you're not limited at all by your biological sex. And I wish I would have had someone to really explain that to me as a kid, because I did believe that being a woman, part of that was gender stereotypes. And so anyway, you don't have to change yourself to be yourself, is something I would say to kids who may be considering transitioning.
That's a beautiful message. You're a beautiful woman and you have a beautiful heart and you're filled with empathy and grace. And I would also add that for those who have transitioned and have regrets, that there is redemption, there is a path back. You can be made whole again in your body, soul, and mind. There might be some consequences, but you can live with peace in your heart. And so I don't want anyone who feels like they made a mistake in their life or a decision thinking that there was the best one and it was wrong. We've all done that. And so don't beat yourself up with guilt. Just there is redemption. And so no matter where you or someone you love are or have been in that process, there is wholeness and restoration for all of us. Kat, we really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
Okay.